Welcome and thank you for joining this webinar. Hi all, welcome and thank you for joining this webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about a tool from Biztory called TabMove, and we'll be looking at how this can accelerate the migration of your analytics environment to Tableau Cloud. So Tableau Cloud is our as-a-service offering, and today more than 70% of new customers choose this as the platform to build their data community. Businesses choose this because it dramatically reduces the number of support issues and it delivers elastic scale and it helps them to adopt new features faster. But we still see a huge number of people that are running their own Tableau server clusters. So either they're doing that on-prem or in their own VPC. And so I've seen a huge amount of interest in this topic because moving from run your own to as a service is just not always all that straightforward. But before we get into the details of how we're going to accelerate the migration, a quick forward-looking statement. So today we're going to focus on products and features that are currently available during this webinar. But during the discussion, we may make some forward-looking statements, and we ask that you make your decisions based on what is currently available as our roadmaps may change. Okay. So let's get into some introductions. So I'm joined today by Timothy Vermeeren from Biztory. If you're part of our Tableau community, you're probably already familiar with some of Tim's work on Tableau Public. He was, of course, the winner of Iron Viz in 2018, and he's also an active data dev ambassador. But Tim, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your day job at Biztory. So what do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Sure, thank you, Francois. Well, you summarized it quite well, and for most of my career, I guess I've been an analyst and consultant, which did lead up to quite a few contributions in the Tableau community, on Tableau Public, etc. The last few years, given my technical background, I've been looking more into Tableau server-related things, installations, upgrades, maintenance, and that evolved into embedding, and then the data dev aspect of my job, which I think is the main part of it today. I'm lucky enough to be a data dev ambassador even, and I do spend most of my days tinkering with every Tableau API there is, all of the extensibility possibilities and building automations and integrations around that. So it's kind of Lego with Tableau as far as I'm concerned, which is a fun job to have, I think.
Fantastic, and thanks for joining us today. So just a bit of background on me. I'm the CTO for Tableau across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I kind of split my role into three. So one is I work with Tech Alliance partners like Google and Snowflake and AWS and Databricks to define end-to-end data patterns and to help our customers with that adoption. Secondly, I work with resellers and system integrators like Biztory to help solve those end-to-end problems. And then finally, I work directly with customers to define joint data strategy, and I'm a voice of product management, so we align roadmap with them. So my background is analytics and cloud services, and also industrial IoT from a previous background. Now, just a few bits of logistics before we get into the topic. There is a Q&A feature in the chat, so we'll be monitoring that during the session, and we're going to create I think we'll have 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the session to look through all of those. We're also going to share a recording of the webinar post-event via email with everyone that's registered for this. So look out for that in your inbox. But let's get into the topic now. I guess starting point, really quickly, why do you think people want to move from on-prem Tableau server or run your own Tableau server inside their virtual private cloud to Tableau Cloud as a service? What are you seeing in the market, Tim?
Yeah, it's a conversation we have often as we're discussing the possibility of migrating. We do try to ask, are you sure you need to do this? What's the benefit for you? And the main reasons we see often fall into I would say three categories. Handing off the management of Tableau server is one of those. I think from our perspective is almost the most common reason, I'd say. I mean, Tableau server is a powerful but complex product. It's evolved with Tableau over the years, has tons and tons of features which do require quite active management, and at some point, it makes sense for teams to refocus and try and hand off that management, which is what Tableau Cloud is naturally, because it's a managed service, so it's a possibility to free up their Tableau team's time. So that's one of them. Another major reason, I guess, that's the other two categories combined, is a company might have a cloud-first strategy, a progressive strategy, where more and more components and tools that they work with are cloud native or are moving to the cloud. And that's section A of the answer. And section B is that fits within a modern data stack as well. We see companies moving their data to the cloud with BigQuery, with Snowflake, and then the reporting layer with Tableau often follows suit and also moves there. So that's the other major reason we see. And then sometimes, when you calculate what the cost is with the management of the platform on Tableau server, of the people have been doing that and freeing up their time, cloud can come out as advantageous as well, significantly, and that's another driver that we see.
Okay, I'm really interested to hear that you mentioned modern data platform, because I'm seeing a lot of that actually. I think there's a few things where, as people start to adopt these platforms like Databricks and Snowflake and BigQuery and what have you, they get elasticity at the data layer. And then they tend to, it seems natural that you would also want the presentation layer to be elastic as well. So there's a lot of that. I think it really fits. If the data is already in the cloud, then often I guess, network, virtual private cloud issues that we might have had with that were driving the adoption of on-prem kind of start to go away. So that's quite interesting. I think it's also really interesting that when people start to adopt modern platform, they often are looking at going big in terms of the number of data consumers internally. So you might see a lot more self-service in those sort of environments, so less of a report factory where a few people are creating insights to more people being able to do more. And I think that creates a lot more unpredictable load on the environment. So it actually makes running your own even harder the more self-service tools you have. We've also been releasing features on Tableau Cloud first recently, because when we launch AI features like natural language generation, that also creates unpredictability in terms of it can consume more or less compute. So it's easier for us to launch it there, monitor it, work out how that scales before we roll that out to Tableau server. So that's kind of the reason we've been following that release cadence. Really interesting to see a lot of the customers that are running on-prem are several releases behind. Yeah. So I think that probably ties in with what you were saying about they're just finding it, they're finding it difficult to keep up to date with on-prem. So moving to the cloud just means that they get the latest features on a quarterly basis. They do. So I think we've I think really interesting about the why now that you mentioned modern data platform, and also this fact that a lot of people are going completely cloud native. Why do you think people haven't done it already? So I mentioned that's new customers, it's becoming kind of a default. 70% of new customers are going straight to Tableau Cloud, but there's a hell of a lot of people are still on premise with huge environments, thousands of analysts in the data community. Why do you think what's been holding them back?
I think that, yeah, so the why, it's a bit of a no-brainer. We've gone through the reasons you do it. So if you could just switch, you would, but there is a bit of a hurdle, admittedly, moving everything from Tableau server to Tableau Cloud. And that's not completely unexpected. I mean, the cases you're bringing up, the customers you're talking about, have built up their Tableau server deployments into the thousands of users, into the thousands upon thousands of workbooks and data sources over years. And so all that having built up does create a bit of tech debt. Okay, you cannot just lift and shift everything. So you will have to sift through and pick up everything you're going to migrate, and just the scale of doing that, of that endeavor, is kind of limiting the possibilities of I think holding people back from getting started with that, because it's not something they'll do in a few days or weeks. Normally, if you tackle a migration the traditional way, it's a project for several weeks for smaller and medium deployments, but potentially months or even years for larger ones. So I think that has been the main obstruction, if anything, that people don't just make the switch.
So what I'm hearing from you is that this is not a like-for-like migration. When people move to Tableau Cloud, they are going to be doing content rationalization. They're going to be thinking about how they want to govern analytics going forward. They're going to have to think about all of their user access and how they organize content. I think a lot of these, a lot of people have been using Tableau for a very long time. They tend to have kind of a lot of content all over the place on their Tableau server environments. And actually to move to Tableau Cloud and use that as an opportunity to put in place some structured governance does seem like something that I see a lot of people doing. And what are the things that you've seen, I guess, go wrong when people underestimate the effort? So I don't think there's such a thing as a like-for-like migration. Even when you look at those modern data platform projects where people are moving from, for example, on-prem databases to Snowflake, they tend to think differently about the way they run their data pipeline. What do you see going wrong when people underestimate that with Tableau Cloud?
I think in one word, expectations, maybe.
Sure.
As in, you do have organizations that expect that for the end user, nothing at all will change. They've used one URL to access their Tableau environment for 5 years, for 7 years, and they expect that when you finish the migration, that same URL will lead up to the very same interface with the exact same 1,337 workbooks in the same place and everything still being there, like nothing ever changed except the backend. So that's an expectation we adjust, because as you say, there is much more to moving to cloud than just bringing your backend there. It's an opportunity for a different approach, a different governance regarding the data, for enabling self-service. So we try to get organizations to embrace this opportunity, this moment where they migrate, to implement these kinds of things, to review their content structure and make use of the work we're going to do anyway to improve as they go. So that's something we have to tweak. I wouldn't say it's something that goes wrong, but it's something that definitely needs some attention to make sure it goes right, and that then those teams we work with communicate to their end users appropriately that change is coming for good, of course.
So I wonder if you could, a really practical level, if you could talk us through the actual process in terms of maybe like at a generic level, how we should think about migrating from on-prem Tableau to the cloud, and then maybe if we get a little demo of how TabMove facilitates that process. Sure,
yeah, happily. I will use our traditional material that we use to set the stage on all this, and to explain to you indeed what this migration entails and why the methodology with TabMove is an interesting one in this case. So yes, let's set the stage, and let's first look. I'm going to use these few diagrams in these slides to walk us through the process. Let's first look at what migrating without TabMove might look like. Now that we've established that migrating is interesting, very often this is the situation we find ourselves in, question marks. Like, well, it turns out it's not that obvious. You would think that it might be as simple as running a backup and then a restore like you do on a traditional server environment, but there are reasons why this is not that simple. Tableau Cloud and its elastic environment is multi-tenant, so it's not like you can go and override everything by restoring a backup. So that is one of the options that is off the table.
So you're talking about customers that have, for example, multi-site in Tableau server, they would consolidate those at the same time as they move. Yeah.
Yes, they might. They might indeed, yes. But it does require a different approach, because the monolithic backup that you normally restore is just not compatible with cloud because of its different architecture. So that's one of the options on the table. Another one would be, you can think of a site export and import. It's a less frequently used feature functionality of Tableau, but there too, there are limitations because that is essentially just your content packaged. It's your extracts and your workbooks and your data sources, but it doesn't include everything. It doesn't have your schedules, it doesn't have your users, etc. So that is lacking a little bit. What comes closest, I would say, part of the built-in and readily available tools is Tableau's own content migration tool, but it is a much more bespoke tool. It does many more things than just migrating. It's in fact kind of a synchronization tool between environments, is how I've sometimes heard it being described. So it's designed more to do continuous integration between environments. You might see it used to promote content from a QA to a production environment, and it does that extremely well, but it does mean that it lacks some minor functionalities that you would expect for a migration, like ensuring that your users and groups are present and creating and transferring those. That's not something that the content migration tool does readily. And then other things like moving a favorite, moving a collection, those are more specific and minor features, admittedly, but that's not the focus of what that tool does. So that is the answer that Biztory puts in place here. It is to use TabMove because this tool is specifically designed to facilitate the migration and nothing else. So it should do one thing, and it should do that one thing really well, ideally. And how does it do that? Well, this is the process we've been mentioning, the process that TabMove goes through to facilitate that migration. And I think the best analogy is, think of what you would be doing if you were to manually migrate your Tableau server environment to Tableau Cloud. I think what you would go through is every asset, every entity on your Tableau server, a user, a group, a workbook, a data source, a favorite, you would go through and take note of and assimilate in the first phase. So you would download all of that, every piece of information. And then you, if you were to do that manually, you would upload it in a second stage. And this is what TabMove does, but then automatically. And that has an interesting benefit. This kind of almost human approach, but then automated, makes sure that we have every possible piece of information. We approach every user and obtain that through the available means, which is mostly the REST API, but some other APIs as well. Every group membership, every project, every permission applied to a project, etc. It's just sifting through every piece of information, every asset, and assimilating that, downloading that. You'll see that in the demo. You will see files physically appearing onto a local copy of our Tableau server environment. And you'll see that they are there, including the metadata, including the workbooks. And that has an important benefit compared to...
By local copy, you mean that can be the workstation that's running TabMove, so that might be actually on-prem, or it might be something that is being run like in the cloud as a temporary staging workstation. Yeah,
depending on where it has to be, requirements from the organization running this, it is a workstation technically. I sometimes run it from my laptop, but it could be a virtual machine within the client's network, within their VPC, etc. So yeah, any of those. Sure. But then the disk of that machine is where that content effectively lands. Yes.
Sure.
So we have a fragmented, almost a granular copy with each asset locally. And we pause here because we've completed the first stage. We've done the download and we have everything. And we pause because that allows us to then also improve, if you will, transform where it's necessary. And one very specific example, but it does come up relatively often, is a workbook that you're going to migrate to Tableau Cloud might not fit immediately. And one key reason for that would be the use of Tableau Bridge to connect to on-premise data sources. So that's a mouthful, and it's enormously specific, but it is a common case that you need to account for when migrating to cloud. So if your data is still on premise, or part of your data still is, some of your workbooks might require to be adjusted so they can work with Bridge and connect to those on-premise data sources. That's a very specific thing to do, but having these assets stored locally and being able to manipulate them before we upload them is a differentiator, is something that TabMove can do and that you would otherwise not be able to do with a site export, with a content migration tool yet, et cetera, et cetera. So those actions here can be taken in this stage.
So this is what you're saying is, as we are migrating, we're also going to be updating the connection credentials so that they are proxied via Tableau Bridge to get back to on-prem. And we'll be updating the data sources that are embedded within workbooks to publish them separately. Okay.
Indeed, that is the gist of it. You mentioned credentials, which is another aspect. We might touch on that a bit more later because there are different approaches for them. So if a question comes up about those, which I think the audience can post in the Q&A at some point, then
sure.
we can go into these details. But yes, manipulating all those specifics is something that is enabled by having this local copy, and then by moving to the next stage and uploading everything one by one as well. Again, sounds like what you do manually. It is what you would do manually, but it is fully automated, and then all these credential mappings, etc., whatever needs to be transformed is being taken care of as well.
And then just do you do this process? Do you do this like at a per project level, or would you do like an entire server installation at a time, or how would you phase it if you were to?
It depends, which is the ubiquitous answer, I guess. For, I think, small and medium-sized deployments, you can consider running it in one go, meaning that you would take the full local copy, every project, every workbook, and then press run on TabMove and have it being uploaded. But it becomes more practical to do that in batches when we're talking about larger environments. Because even though this is an automated process, you do need to move that content almost physically. A workbook is a file that you have to upload. So if you have a workbook with an embedded extract that is 3 gigabytes, then you're going to have to wait for that 3 gigabytes to be uploaded. Now, of course, sure. If you make the right choices in your TabMove and migration architecture, that can be fast because you can have a cloud-based VM sitting quite close to your target. And then, you'll have an upload speed of 100 megabytes per second, but still there is some work to be done there. And then the batching helps controlling that and also helps the quality control. So after having moved a number of workbooks, for example, I'm pausing to review the results of that move, which I'll showcase in the demo as well. We have a few tools to do that, which is harder to do if you have everything moving in one go.
And then just finally, a couple of things we see a lot of is customers who've, through, because they've been deploying Tableau ad hoc, they've ended up with maybe tens of sites on their on-prem environment. They want to consolidate those into like a more rationalized project structure. We can do that in flight as well. That's all part of this rationalization that's happening in the middle here. Yeah.
Correct. Yes. So. Okay. You did also mention the opportunity for governance and for content structure to be reviewed. So yeah, we try to apply that because this is effectively a moment of change. So it is an opportunity to apply these things that will fit better with the environment going forward and how they want to handle it then. So yeah, merging sites specifically is a demand we got relatively often. And then we have a few options. They can be merged into top-level projects on your single Tableau Cloud site, for example, but then more specific solutions are possible as well through some mapping. And usually, there's just a conversation to be had with who's migrating.
Okay.
All right.
Cool. Thank you.
That's all talk. So how about we try and showcase what this looks like? And I will share a different screen for this, which should be popping up now. And it might look very weird at the start. You should see 6 segments on this screen, 6 areas. And let me go through those and explain what you're seeing. It doesn't look very fancy at all, but I think it's the best representation of TabMove in action that we can give you. And it's also really, really what's happening. So to showcase this, On the top left, what I have is a Tableau server, or Tableau server at Biztory, with a demonstration site that has just 4 projects. Of course, a limited amount of content for this demo because it has to run in just a few minutes. So these 4 projects, I have a file explorer open that will showcase the local copy after our first download stage. And then on the right, I have my target Tableau Cloud site, which is my personal data dev site, where the content will land after or during the second stage. And what I'll do is I'll use a neat little extension to automatically refresh this tab every 5 seconds. So we see things appearing on there as TabMove is migrating them, at least ideally. And for now, below that, by the way, I have what we'll look into, which is the run results in the run report from TabMove. I mentioned we need to do quality control. We need to see if everything moved properly. This will facilitate that for us. But before, I'll quickly show you that if I go into users, we just have the single user to start with. If I go into groups, there is nothing there. So it's a blank site as you would activate it when you start using Tableau Cloud. And then the 2 other bits we have is, I'll reset the view on the bottom left. This is a small tool on top of TabMove. It's a monitor that we use that shows which TabMove runs are running at any point. So I have none running right now. 1 crashed by design and a few were stopped. But you'll see on here, we'll be able to follow what's going on. And then the core of everything is the black square here, the command line, which is where I'm going to be running TabMove. So no fancy user interface for this demo. This is really just a command line tool that we configure with these mappings that we discussed, and then that automates every action that we want it to take to download and to upload the content. So the stage is set once more. I have a demo that does all of these steps. It first clears everything locally and everything on the site, which is done. And now we are already kicking off stage 1. So the download going from left here to right. You see the monitor with this green, and the play icon indicates that a run is going on. And right away, all kinds of things appear here. Folders reflecting the projects, and then files containing the metadata that we need to know about. Projects contain workbooks, etc. And then right away, it's already kicked off the second stage, which is the upload. And it should, in a minute or 2, be uploading the content to the target Tableau Cloud site. You will see the projects appearing. I might just also pull up the users page. But it is doing some preparation first. So within an upload stage, there are different phases still, where TabMove compares what is already on the cloud side, what is local, and what the difference is, so that it knows, okay, I do need to upload this workbook, I do need to create this user, etc. So I think it's running right now. We're seeing projects appearing. I think I might have a single user for the demo, so that's not a really good view to show here, but it doesn't matter. We see the projects. And the command line, admittedly, isn't very fun to look at. It's really just a wall of text, but very detailed information surfaces here. So if something doesn't go according to plan, we have logs that we dive into to find out what happened. Maybe a transformation of a workbook, such as adjusting it to use Bridge, didn't go according to plan, so we know what to handle next. And that's important because this is not a thing we do in a single run. We will do this a first time, and then we will investigate what happened, what went well, and what didn't go well. And we will iterate to improve our configurations, our mappings, etc., to ensure that in the end, everything gets migrated so that we get as close as possible to the expected result with potential content structure changes, etc.
So you might run through this and find a few assets which couldn't be migrated because, for example, Bridge couldn't contact the on-prem data source. All of those. The extract refresh credentials couldn't be updated automatically, and then you'll iterate to patch. Okay. Exactly. So and that's why you've got this detailed logging going on here in the middle, so that you get a set of deltas and then you migrate in waves.
Correct. Yeah.
Understood. Okay.
This is not something we expect, the customer who migrates to use. This is us controlling the process, but we will work, of course, with the customer using instead the run reports, which I'll show you in just a moment. I think I've just, so the demo loops, so it's just removed everything again, but you should have seen on the top right, the projects appeared. Yeah. One of the projects was favorited as it was before, etc. So this is a demo designed to run forever. But I think, we've seen what happened. Now, more interesting is then how we review this. And I think I can take about a minute still to go through that. I mentioned quality control, the patching, as you said, Francois. We're not going to read through the logs. Instead, we have a dashboard here with a run summary. And I'm going to select the last run that we did, which we kicked off at 27 past the hour. So it took about 3 minutes to upload 6 workbooks, 3 data sources, to create 5 groups, 4 projects, etc. I'm not going to go into detail, but I'm seeing a summary here at the top that shows me every asset type, as we call them. An asset can be a group, an asset can be a workbook, and then I can see the success rate for each of those. Now, it's the demo, so we haven't made everything 100% successful because that wouldn't be very interesting. We see, for example, for workbooks, which I can select, a rate where we have warnings for 50% of the content, a third of it went through successfully, and then there's a problem with a single workbook that didn't get migrated. And so I'll use this report to walk through that and start analyzing which things really require attention. For example, here I have the project tracker, which is this project, and as TabMove migrated it, some things went well. And I'm seeing these icons here, these circles that showcase things that went as they should. Like this step was the workbook was created successfully, so it was published. But then some things did happen, like a connectivity check for this connection to Snowflake did not return a successful result. And that's being highlighted here in this relatively easy to consume overview, so that I know, okay, something with credentials, this is one of the things we'll need to patch as we iterate and as we continue.
And that might be as simple as the user logging onto that data source and embedding new OAuth credentials for Snowflake, and then that's resolved. Okay.
Exactly.
So you're using Tableau as the reporting tool. So you upload these administration console reports directly to the target site so that everyone's got the full audit trail of what's happened in terms of the migration on the target.
Correct. This lands as a Tableau report in the default project on the new cloud side, so that whoever is involved in the migration can access it and review whichever content they might be responsible for.
Okay. Great.
We had to do Tableau on Tableau, of course. So this is the process. We've seen the concepts. We've seen it applied in a very, I admit it's a pretty quick demo, but that should give you an idea of how it all works. So there, TabMove.
Sure. I some of the things I like, I know a lot of those Tableau server environments that have been built up over a long period of time have thousands and thousands of pieces of content. So having a really structured audit log when you move stuff across is just going to make it a lot easier to reassure your users that their content is where it should be, and that they haven't lost work. So that's I wonder if you could talk through any customer stories or specific use cases where you guys have used TabMove to improve efficiency and reduce costs and help people to migrate across quicker.
Sure, yeah. I'll admit, this is a bit of a, it's a very linear use case. You use TabMove to migrate. It's a one-use tool for whoever is using it. But it does bring these benefits that you mentioned, the efficiency, the reduced cost, and even driving innovation. And the reason why is quite simple, I think, because you got to ask yourself, okay, we decided we're going to migrate to Tableau Cloud, and we basically have 2 options. We do it ourselves, or we use a tool like TabMove to support and facilitate that. So the use case is compare what it would cost to do it yourself to what it would cost to do it with TabMove. So if you do it yourself, it's not a very, very difficult equation, I think, because you can calculate, assuming, let's say, an average time of 25 minutes to migrate a workbook, an average time of 1 minute to recreate a user, and then maybe even using some mechanisms like uploading a CSV, etc. Like you can calculate more or less the amount of time in man hours it would take to migrate, and we can compare that to what TabMove would need in amount of time to do that, and that's the case you can make, if you will. Now, sure. I'll admit there are use cases like a very, very, very small deployment with a dozen workbooks and users. You don't need TabMove to migrate that. It's going to be quicker to just take your stuff and republish it and do that, because you'll be done before you've connected TabMove to every moving piece that you have. But as soon as you start going into any real scale of a deployment, a few dozen workbooks, etc., then it becomes more interesting. And so the use case in the end for the clients is, well, again, I'm gonna restate the fragments of the question. Efficiency obviously is improved through speed. Cost is reduced because time is freed up for people who might otherwise have had to spend their time like downloading and re-uploading workbooks, etc. And another fragment of the question is how does it drive innovation? I'm gonna focus on that for a second, because we've had customers that we worked with that literally said not having to migrate ourselves allowed us to do different things, such as spending their time guiding their users into this transition and into the change related to data governance. We talked about this earlier, Francois, where we said maybe this is a new era of self-service because now cloud enables that. Well, that freed up their time to ensure that everyone was prepared for this change and was able to do that. We've had other customers where they said, instead of moving Tableau dashboards within our modern data platform, which is a larger scale migration even, they were able to refocus their attention on migrating the data, ensuring that that is in place by the time then that TabMove puts all of the reporting with Tableau in place. So having the ability to refocus their attention on something else during that migration, that's, I think, the end game for most of the customers we've worked with.
Yeah, and I think it feels to me like having a fully automated approach where you have like a solid audit trail is really important, where you have lots and lots of content with different permission structures, because it's quite easy when you migrate content to, inadvertently create a project which has got wider access than you would like, and then you end up exposing data where you shouldn't. So I think it feels to me like we're migrating content. That content has to have user permissions and what have you around it. By doing that in an automated way, it feels like that's going to take a bunch of risk out. That brings me on to another question, which is a lot of the time when people are migrating to Tableau Cloud, they are, one of the key topics we talk about is data security, compliance, SCREMS too, so data residency and what have you. We've thought quite hard about this. So in Europe, we have like an EU pod in Ireland. We also have a pod in the UK now that they've left the EU. So we can maintain data residency within those two markets. And we've also recently added bring your own encryption key to Tableau Cloud, so that we can make sure that only you can access your content inside the site, and you can encrypt your extracts with the key that you provide. But what sort of concerns have you seen with using TabMove, and how have you thought about data security and compliance?
Good question again. I guess here, what we're trying to do with TabMove is we really just want to move the content to Tableau Cloud. So let's try and follow suit with what's happening in Tableau Cloud, with that data residency, the way it's implemented, with encryption where it's necessary. And as long as we follow what is implemented in Tableau Cloud, we should be okay. But of course, well, TabMove is the bridge between Tableau Server and Tableau Cloud. So at some point, we've seen the local copy, the content and the data is going to sit there, and that needs to be accounted for as well. So we have some flexibility in how we approach the TabMove migration. And this was touched upon earlier, I think. We mentioned it can be run from wherever it needs to be run. It can be a workstation like my laptop, but I think that that is the least preferred of choices. Instead, it can run on a physical or virtual machine within the client's network, if that is where we want the transfer to happen, the local copy to instantiate, or a requirement would be that it is part of their VPC, in which case that is where we'll set up the virtual machine on which TabMove runs. So following suit there and remaining as close as possible to what is already being done at the client and with Tableau Cloud, I guess, is how we mostly try to address the residency of the data and whether it has to be encrypted, because that is then all still within the hands of the customer. Typically, if we use a VM of theirs, what they do is they grant us access just for the migration endeavor. And once that's done, access is revoked and they've retained control throughout all times, because they could have just, cut it off whenever it was necessary.
So TabMove is completely out of band. So after the migration, that temporary server can be decommissioned. So presumably you retain the audit logs in the target environment. So all of those remain after we've uninstalled TabMove, so people can see the before and after picture from that point. Yeah.
It's interesting to keep those indeed, because the way we do this, by the way, I haven't talked about the human aspect much, but we work quite closely with the teams who manage Tableau to go through the run reports and interpret them in the way that it has to be interpreted. I know how TabMove functions, and I can tell them why a certain error pops up, but they can tell me, related to connectivity, for example, what's going on with those credentials that we need to patch. So that we do during the migration, but it's worth keeping that track record, as you say, because while we do that during the migration, there's a very good chance that after 3 weeks, after 3 months, something does still come up, however diligent we have been. So we do need to keep track of that. So that does remain there for as long as it needs to. Also, obviously, still in control of the customer, because they can do with that workbook and it's extract what they want. But that is one piece we do try to keep in place. Yes.
Okay. Just to wrap up on TabMove, I did see a couple of questions came in on the chat about the local copy that TabMove is storing. I think the question was, that's something like a TS back file. I don't think it is a TS back file. I think you're storing data in a much more granular way. So you're storing like those JSON files contain the dumps of the user structure and the folder structure and all of that, so that you can adjust them in flight. Whereas if we were to use like a backup and restore, you wouldn't be able to change the structure in sight. So you're storing in a very granular format so that we can do all that restructuring in flight. Is that right?
Correct. Yes. I think the question was being asked as we were approaching the topic. So,
sure.
But I think your summary is excellent. So that is what it comes down to. Yes. Okay.
And now just before we wrap up, you've landed in the cloud, and you want to build like a big data community. What sort of ongoing support does Biztory offer in terms of helping people to optimize their cloud deployment and helping to roll out community, and even doing things like external analytics? What sort of things are you doing to help your customers?
Yeah, so the migration is just a means to an end, I guess, indeed. So you landed in the cloud, and ideally you're now ready and already busy implementing new data governance, rethinking self-service on your environment. And I guess the first involvement of Biztory is helping support those steps, like saying, okay, we have seen a multitude of environments. We've seen how clients apply governance, the blueprint. So we'll help you do that while someone's busy working on the migration, and the two, of course, will connect and ensure that all of that is being set up in that appropriate way. But then going forward, indeed, you've unlocked more possibilities, ideally, and you've mentioned specifically embedding. That is one of the things that can be done more easily, I think, in cloud, because they, for example, released connected apps, the new way of embedding for cloud before they did for server. So with that, what we would do as Biztory is, you've got this opportunity to embed, you have your clients that you want to give access to this dashboard. Here is what that could look like. And we have services to discuss the whole setup and perform that whole setup to embed your dashboards into a portal, into an application. And we call those labs. So it's really a really, really big workshop where we take you through the whole process of designing and implementing Tableau in your portal. It could be that. Completely on the other side of the scope would be, okay, we have our analysts and we're now running in this self-service mode. We need to ramp up their skills, because while they know their data very well, they're still rather new to Tableau and they've just been giving the keys to the kingdom. Well, training, obviously, these analysts to use either an explorer role with web authoring or a creator role where they are more of a data curator. You know, those trainings would be delivered as a follow-up as well, typically.
Okay, so most people, when they migrate into Tableau Cloud, they're also doing that with a view to increasing the percentage of their employees that can self-serve answers, so that they have wider data take-up across the organization. So I think that's all we have time for today. Just a quick wrap-up. We see a lot of people who are running Tableau on-premise. That's still works for them, but sometimes you end up with lots and lots of content that is kind of badly curated. So when you start to plan that migration to the cloud, think about what good looks like. If you could start with a blank sheet of paper and organize your content in a project structure that fits the way your business actually operates and the way your governance models actually work, what would that look like? Tools like TabMove, which our partners are developing, will help you to get there in a structured way. So that this doesn't have to be a multi-year project to go from on-prem to the cloud. It can be something we can do in a really, really structured way, in an iterative way, so that we can get across in a realistic bit of time. I wonder, Tim, if there is any other content you'd like to signpost to. What we'll do after this event is we will, as I said, share the recording to everyone that's registered the email address. If there's any other content you'd like to signpost people towards that you'd like to mention now before we wrap up.
Yes, there is. I guess the one follow-up for you, if you think this is interesting, and I'll share the slide and the link on screen, is that we have a page that describes this approach where you can follow up and we can get in touch if you'd like to speak about what this might mean for a potential migration you have in mind. So that's campaign.biztory.com/tabmove. You can head over there and we can help you figure out how you can perform this big move. Yeah,
you're sharing your big screen rather than the slide screen, but I think we can just about see it there. So yeah. Okay. So we'll so thanks again everyone for attending the call, and thanks Tim for taking us through how you guys are thinking about this problem. It's a really interesting problem to solve, and it's interesting to see the way that you've approached that at Biztory. So thanks again, and thanks to everyone for joining this call. Cheers.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye then.